Okay, we've had first lecture, we've had a second one, right? So with the second lecture, it's still here. These are the things we did. We looked at the processes. This was a recap of the first lecture where we discussed some key concepts in risk management. Before moving to the processes, there were 7 processes. Out of the 7 processes, we had to pick the first one. I think we had completed the first one. Everything from here till the end was a discussion of the first process of risk management, which was plan risk management. So we looked at the inputs, we looked at the outputs, as well as the tools and techniques, right? So today is a continuation. So in this third meeting on risk management, after this meeting on risk management, we're going to shift focus and do something else in our next meeting. So what do you suggest we do in our next meeting?
We have to finish with the calculations on project finance and feasibility studies.
Haven't we finished the calculations?
No, the section B.
No, the section B. We didn't do it.
Okay, I think you suggested that I solve and post, right?
But you haven't.
Yes, no, I haven't yet. But
if you can solve and post, it's cool, so that we can do something else.
Yes, yes. That's why I planned to solve and post, so you can have it. So that would be cool. Okay, so let's move on. Today this is lecture 3. Lecture number 3 on project risk. I think I enjoyed our previous lecture 2. I thought it was smoother.
Yeah,
it was smoother than yeah. So I just hope this will be like that, so that
hopefully
it builds and there should be not so much interruptions in terms of the network. I'm just praying that the network is stable. So we're looking at the second, how far we can go, but we're going to consider the second step. So we're going to discuss, identify risk. Just as we did for the first step, here we're also going to do indicate the inputs. What inputs do you need to be able to effectively identify risk? What are the inputs you need? They are
chapter.
You need the projects management plan. But what under the project management plan do we need? We need a project management plan, all right. But what do we need there to be able to, in which aspects of the project management?
The charter.
This one is too early.
Okay, I'm back. Network as usual. So you can mute your microphones. I've realized something. I realized that a lot of people rely on the video we share. They usually do not have time to join the class in the evening, but I can tell that they've watched the video.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need, in the project management plan, we need the cost baseline. Why do we need that? Because we need to review to identify costs or funding requirements that are subject to what? Uncertainty and ambiguity. Sometimes there are certain key assumptions you've made about costs and funding that may give an indication to risk. Remember, at some point you indicate assumptions, you indicate constraints and things like that. Those could also be an indication of risk. So the cost baseline, you can actually review it to identify cost of funding requirements that may be source of risk, right? There's also schedule. The schedule baseline, you can also do that. You can review the schedule baseline to do what? To identify milestones and deliverables, due dates that are subject to uncertainty and ambiguity, right? So now you're trying to identify milestones. Okay, when you check the milestones, okay, at this point, probably we're not very certain, but it's like having elections, right? Or there's likely to be some events that might disrupt this particular holiday. There's something. For instance, if initially in your milestones, you did not take into consideration that there's Salah coming up for the Muslims fasting, right? And this might likely affect a day or two of our work, right? So you need to check out for this and see where some risk might erupt. And then we can also look at the scope. So what kind of risk might be related to the schedule baseline? So we can obviously tell this risk will be related to schedule. We're likely not to meet deadlines. Then we can also look at the scope baseline. Then still under the project management plan, there is the risk management plan. All of this fall under the project management plan. They're all plan, the scope baseline, the schedule baseline, blah, blah, they're all subsets of the project management plan. So that's why as a heading, you need the project management plan from which you can pick a lot of information, right? Other than the risk management plan, we also have a resource management plan. There is the quality management plan. Costs. Okay, we indicated the baseline, but we can look at, other than the baseline, with respect to cost, we can look out for the entire plan itself. So the cost management plan. Other than just schedule baseline, we can look at the schedule management plan. And at some point in the project management plan, we indicated requirements, right? So we can also make reference to the requirements management plan. So in the requirement management plan, take note that you are looking out for the project objectives. These requirements are related to the project objectives. The requirements related to project objectives. What are your project objectives? Those are part of the requirements. So you can actually check the requirement management plan to see an indication of project objectives that are likely to be at risk, right? So these are some of the inputs you need. Then one, you also, as part of the input, you need the project document. Project document. If I may ask, what project document did we need during the plan risk management? We mentioned only one. What was it? Hello?
Fatin, come again.
This is step 2.
The stakeholder register.
That's it. Step 1 was plan risk management. Another plan risk management, we needed project documents, certain project documents as inputs, right? But it was just one. And I was asking which one did we make reference to? Someone has just mentioned that it was stakeholder
Register.
Stakeholder register, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But for this particular step where you need to identify risk, I think you need a lot more document. You need a lot more documents. And one is the assumption log. Remember, at some point, we indicated the assumptions constraints. Now, that was also part of the charter, I think, right? But
Yeah.
you should have a separate document, you should have a separate document that has identified or where you have outlined the various assumptions and constraints. And that document is referred to as the assumption
Gone.
Shorten is gone again.
Light off, light off.
Is he using plug and play or what? Light off something. And 14, you've taken
People
enough
you've not paid.
Maybe
People
he's
you've not
putting,
paid. You've not paid. Oh.
he's putting on generator. Don't worry, he's putting on the generator.
Munda yo. Yo.
We'll finish and come and tell us Moondai. Waste all the time.
Hey, man, it's recording, so we have to know how you pass our comments.
But he has to hear.
Eh.
This recording is not going to the court, don't worry.
Okay, I'm back. Network as usual. Okay, so we've mentioned the assumption log. Another document we need is the duration estimate. Duration estimates, we need that document. Make assessment of project duration quantitatively. So we actually need this duration estimate so that we can see at some point where they are likely to be uncertainties or ambiguity with respect to risk. There's also we can also have issue log. Maybe for related projects, we had certain issues raised, which are documented. So that document, you can make reference to that document to be able to help you identify risk in the existing or the new project you are embarking on. There's also the cost estimates. These are all documents we need to make reference to. And lessons learned register. We need this document, right? Lessons you've learned from previous related projects, which you've documented. You can make reference to that document to see lessons you've learned, and then see how you can, that will help you to identify risk with respect to the new project. You can also make reference to
Martin,
the stakeholder. Yes, please.
Martin, the lessons learned register, how is it different from the organization process asset?
Yeah, it's parts. The organizational process assets, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's, in fact, that is with respect to the organization. It's everything the organization has that you may need as a project manager to help you identify risk, not just identify risk, but plan the management of risk, right? So assuming you're a consultant, you've not worked with the institution before, right? You've not worked with the institution before.
Okay.
So, but the institution has things you probably need. So lessons learned register is just one out of several documents or assets that you can rely on.
Okay, thank you.
From the organization. So lessons learned is just, so we also, here we also have the stakeholder register. So it means you still need the register here when identifying risk, because in the stakeholder register, remember, you've assigned owners of risk based on their risk tolerance levels and things you've identified about them, their attitude towards risk. So you can still make reference to that register to see what risk you are likely to identify. Requirement, resource requirement. The resource could include manpower, human resource, and a number of other resources. Remember, there's a document that you have stated what the requirements. You can make reference to this document to see which of the requirements are likely to pose risk, right? So I think these are, we've indicated 8, 2, 4, 6. Okay, we've indicated 7, right? So the stakeholder register, the resource requirements, we've indicated that. And even the documentation, right? There are certain documentations with respect to the requirements. In fact, the list, we can expand it, but anything you think of related to the project that can help you to identify risk as a document is what we've listed here. These are just some of them. Another input we need other than the project management plan and the project document is the agreements. You need agreements. Remember that disputes can arise from agreements. And whenever there are disputes, it can lead to consequences we did not foresee, right? Because these can be disagreement between two key stakeholders, right? It could even be disagreement between the project team and another key stakeholder, say the sponsor. So imagine if there's a disagreement, assuming you're a sponsor. In this case, we refer to you as the owner of, say, a private, your own building. You've contracted a number of people to erect a building for you, but it got to some point, there's a major disagreement between you and the contractors, right? And that might lead to a lot of issues, right? So you can make reference to agreements relating to this particular project. For instance, we can make reference to external, let me use red, agreements you've had with external procurement of resources, You probably have had agreement with contractors. You can mention them. So these agreements might be a source of risk which you need to take note of. So you can make reference to agreements you've had. And we can also make reference to procurement. Documentation. Take note that the project requires certain external procurement of resources. You may not, as a project team, or even the client, may not be able to gather all the resources he or she needs, right? So there's the need to contract other people that may get these resources for you. And these people may be external to the project. So whatever initial procurement document you have, there's a need to review it to see likely risk that may come out of such documentations you've had already. And the other one, which was part of the first, and this might even run through, is the EEF. Remember what the EEF is? Enterprise, environmental, factors. And we mentioned when we're discussing the first step, which was plan risk management, that this could be with respect to the organization and even individual stakeholders. And in this case, we can make a few lists of the enterprise environmental factors. Let's go back and check for the plan risk management. This is what we did for the plan risk management. That's for step 1. we mentioned with reference to organization above, the practices and procedures likely to affect the outcome of any project, right? So it's still the same thing with risk, identifying risk. But with this one, we're going to look at specifics. We'll look at, say, we'll look at certain published materials. Right? Even if you check online, you can even find some of these published materials that have identified risks in certain areas. Let's say banking, for instance. You can check online to identify to see some of the risks that have been identified with respect to what banking projects, right? And that is external to the organization. And apart from published materials, you can get online at the libraries and things. Even you can have academic studies, journals. You can check journals, some academic studies, maybe thesis, other publications might probably have undertaken certain studies in key risk areas, and in the studies they've identified risk. So you can also make reference to those academic journals, publications that have identified risk with respect to certain related projects, and see how that can also relate to the particular project you're doing.
Hello, 14.
And sometimes it's not only published materials, academic studies, even industry itself. Assuming you're doing maybe a study, a project related to banking, for instance, you can make reference to certain industry studies. Let's say Stan Chart, for instance, they probably
Who is that?
That's it.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, so these are respect to the EEF. There is also another input we need to be able to identify risk is the OPA. That is the organizational process assets. What did we say about the organizational process assets when we're discussing the first step, which was plan risk management? This is it. This is it, organizational process assets. So these are some of the assets we needed when we're planning risk. So under plan, but now we are discussing identity. These include
You said roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders.
Can actually make reference to the project files. The OPAs are those assets that the organization already has, which you as a project manager external to the organization may need. Whether you're part of the organization or not, you may need to be able to help you identify risk. For instance, you can check other project files to see what risks were identified, right? You can also check their controls, right? Organizational and process controls. You can also make reference to checklists from previous similar projects. What this means is that this organization might have a template
Hey, today, dear. Oh.
Mundayo.
Okay, I'm back.
What's in?
Okay, check it. Yes, I'm back. The network. It keeps today. The network is very bad. It keeps tripping on and off.
Checklist from previous. Is that previous?
Yeah, this previous.
Right.
Similar projects. So this is also an organizational process asset, right? It's part of the process to present a checklist of during risk identification. So use that checklist to be sure that no risk has been left out as much as possible.
Fortune,
so
can't you find the
please.
checklists in the project file? Or there are two separate documents?
No, there are two separate documents because this project file is with respect to a particular project, but the checklist is more or less like a template, right? So that anytime you're undertaking any task that is related to project, right? Identify risk to help you ensure that you've not left out certain reasons, right? For instance, we saw in a previous class that there is commercial risk, right? There's a technical risk. There is external.
Is it managerial?
Yes. And it could be that under each of them, there are questions that will help you identify. Maybe this organization, for instance, as a checklist, they'll ask you, let's say, under, say, technical, for instance, you'll be asked, right? Have you identified this risk? Yes, no. Have you identified these other risks under technical? Yes, no. So it's up to you to think, okay, this risk, is it actually related to this particular project I'm doing currently, right? Let's say scope definition. Scope definition is under technical risk. So you can think around it, okay, with respect to scope definition, are there any risk? With this particular project, am I sure that the scope has been properly defined? If the scope is not properly defined, there's likely to be what? Risk emanating from it. So that would draw attention to the fact that, okay, you are likely to have some risk from that end. It could also be maybe technology, which is also under technical risk, right? So have you identified any risk with respect to technology? Yes, no. So that's a checklist that helps you to probably identify risk based on the various levels of risk, right? Okay, so that's it with the OPAs, which is still under inputs. So we can now move away from input. So with the input, how many have we looked at? We've looked at 1, the plan, 2, documents, 3, agreements with respect to procurement documentation, 4, EEF was part of the first process, is also part of the second. This was part of the first process, also part of the second. So we've seen 6 inputs for identify risk. Let's move on to the tools. So tools and techniques. Do you remember some of the tools and techniques we identified for plan risk management? They included what? Expert judgment, what I'm writing is what we, okay, let's go back quickly and make reference to that. I think it should be somewhere here. The tools, okay, here.
Data analysis
Tools and techniques. So it was expert judgment, data analysis, and meetings.
Yeah.
How do we relate this to, this was for plan, when you were planning risk. And now we've moved away from plan risk. Now we're identifying risk. What tools and techniques do you need to be able to effectively identify risk with respect to the project you're undertaking? One is data gathering. So still expert judgment is part. So have a expert judgment, right? There is data gathering. At this stage, you are not just analyzing, but you're gathering data because you want to identify. Your goal is to identify risk. So you need to gather as much data as possible to identify. And how do you gather the data? Sorry, who just spoke? Hello? Okay. So how do we gather this data? What technique do we need to gather this data? We need brainstorming. Brainstorming, either as an individual or as part of the project team. There is also checklists and you may even conduct interviews, right? To be able to identify, as you're gathering data, to be able to identify certain risks. Other than expert judgment, there is also data analysis. So you gather data and you analyze data. So data analysis. But what technique do you need? What technique? These are the tools, and we're looking at techniques. Another data gathering, some of the techniques are brainstorming, checklists, interviews. So these are tools. And data analysis is also a tool, but what is a technique? There is, according to the PIM book, there is document analysis.
Register.
There's document analysis. We're looking at the technique now. There is the SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis. Strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. There is assumptions and constraints analysis. Remember your assumption log. Assumption end. So you can actually analyze your assumption log. And constraint analysis. Constraint analysis is also the root cause analysis. I think we also saw root cause analysis under data analysis for plan. Root cause analysis. And so that's it with data analysis. What other do we need? For the first process, which was plan risk, there was meeting in addition. And for that one, the data gathering and data analysis was just data analysis. And there was no gathering before meeting. But here there is an additional one, which is the interpersonal interpersonal, and team skills, your ability to facilitate, right? That skill to be able to facilitate effectively the gathering of data, right? Using the right approach to identify risk. There is also the prompt lists. These are some of the tools. Prompt lists. All I'm indicating here is according to the PIN book. So the prompt lists. And yes, meeting is still part. So it means meeting was in the first and is also here. When you are doing plan risk management, we had meetings. So there's also meetings here. We've explained meetings already. There's no need talking about meetings. Right. Okay. So what else? We've looked at inputs for the second stage, which is identify risk. We've looked at the inputs. I think we had about 6 of them, right? We've also looked at the tools and techniques we need. Here we have 6. We've listed 6. In the first one, the first stage, we had expert judgment, we had data analysis and meetings. But here we have 3 extra, which is data gathering, interpersonal and team skills, and also prompt lists. Then let's move on to the third. Remember, for each of them, we're supposed to have inputs, tools, and techniques, and outputs. Now we're looking at outputs. Outputs. Now, what shows, or what do you have to show that you've actually identified risk? At least there should be a document that has all the risk you've identified, right? Not just the risk you identify, but the owners of those risks. When we refer to owners of risk, we simply mean, right, those that are responsible to manage those risks, because they're supposed to manage the risk. Those that are responsible, so it means you're going to assign risk to risk owners. A risk owner is someone who is responsible for managing certain risk. And that person might be responsible for monitoring to identify anytime such risk is about to occur, so that you now apply the necessary measure to managing the risk. So you should have a register, basically a risk register. So your major output is just one, risk register. Your risk register should have one, the identified risk. So the risk you've identified, but you don't just identify the risk, you assign risk owners, right? So the assign potential risk owners, so that those who be in charge of those risks, and also responses. So potential risk responses. Right. Then another output other than the risk register is the risk report. Not just the register, but there should be a detailed report right, of risk. And this report should basically include the sources of overall project risk, indicating which are the most important drivers of overall project risk exposure. There is, under the risk report, the latter statement I just made is with reference to the fact that you've indicated the most important drivers of overall project risk. Remember, we mentioned two levels, individual and overall project risk. And we said that the individual project risk are those risks that are likely to affect just one or two objectives. But the overall project risk are those risks that are likely to affect everything, the entire project. In fact, if you have, say, 3 objectives, and let's say one of your objectives is to meet schedule, right? Costs, blah, blah, blah. Let's say you have 3, schedule, costs, and maybe one other one. And there's a particular risk that is affecting only schedule, that falls under individual risk, right? Then affecting only cost, that is also individual. But if it affects costs, schedule cost, and any other objective, all the objectives you have, that becomes overall risk. So with respect to sources, you need to identify the sources of overall project risk. And then with that, you'll be able to rank them and know the risks that are more important, where you need to pay so much attention, because should those risks occur, they're likely to affect the entire project. And that might even lead to early termination of the project or closure of the project. And it should, apart from sources, it should also include summary. So it should include summary of the individual project risk. According to the PM book, this includes number of identified threats and opportunities, distribution of risk across risk categories. When we say risk categories, remember the risk categories: commercial, managerial, external, technical, right, basically. Right. So other than the risk register, the risk report, there is another very important one, which is project document. Updates. Now you need to go back to the project documents. What are some of the project documents we saw under risk, identify risk? Some of these project documents include, but not limited to, assumption log, duration estimates, issue logs, cost estimate, lessons learned register, right? So at this stage, you might update some of these documents and discard the old one, so you add on. So you present a new, probably you're going to present, maybe not all of them, but just some. You might end up presenting a new assumption log, which may supersede the assumption log you made reference to. You made reference to duration estimates. You might come up with a new duration estimate based on the risk you've identified. You might come up with new lessons learned register based on risk you've identified. You might come up with a completely new stakeholder, an updated stakeholder register, right? Because you may identify certain risks that will require that you introduce new stakeholders. And these stakeholders might not just be internal, they could be external. For instance, you may see the need to escalate certain risks, right? Outsource certain risk ownership. So there's a need to bring these people on board. That means you need to go back and update your stakeholder register. So that's what it meant by project document updates. So basically, specifically, we may want to update one, especially the assumption log, to issue log, and lessons learned register. Take note. Okay, do you know in the past, or let me say in the recent past, your exams on risks are not usually multiple choice. They are essay type. Have you been given any info?
Yes, we've been told.
Okay, it's been like that in the past. So if you can get a past question, it will guide you. I think I have one or two. I'm not supposed to mention in this video that I have them. Right? Because I don't know who is watching it. Yes, yeah, but I'm not supposed to mention. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it. So we are done with step number 2. What was step 3?
Fortune.
Yes, please.
What's the difference between the
risk analysis?
Pardon?
Perform risk analysis.
Yes, but which risk analysis do you perform first?
Qualitative.
Hello?
Okay, so you have to perform. Remember, step 3 and 4 are analysis, but they've been separated. The qualitative analysis. Yes, please.
I was asking what's the difference between the log and register?
Oh, they're completely different.
And what is
right?
it?
Register has a format. The register has a format, but for the log, you have, it's like you go to work, you log in, you leave work, you log out. So now, as a project runs, something might just come up.
Is it
just
something electronic or?
Pardon? Your network is also bad. I can't hear you. Yeah, that's from your end. I can't hear what you're saying.
So is it like the log? It gives you room to update it as you go along.
In fact, the log, you can be updating it constantly. Anytime you notice anything, you just go and write down. It's like a jotter.
Okay.
Like it's more like a jotter, but the risk register is more organized, right? It's a template you just follow, but the log might not just be a template. You just take, it's like a jotter where you take note of things. Okay, I think I've noticed. Let me put it down before I forget. You put this down. These are logs. Anytime there's a problem, there's an issue. You have an issue log, go and write it there. Right? So more or less, it's like a jotter where you jot things as they happen. So you keep updating it. So the other one is perform qualitative risk
quantitative
analysis.
Implement risk response, monitor risk.
Okay, I think you are getting frustrated with the network. I can hear you. But we're told that Ghana has the best, I think one of the best network. I think there's a recent publication that whether in Africa, Ghana is whether topping. I don't know how true that is.
And did you believe that?
Well,
then
but we keep complaining. Network, anything you're doing, network is always breaking.
So you don't have to believe that.
Okay.
Oh.
I see.
Like
okay,
imagining
so how do we
US is telling us about human rights.
That we do better, right?
Yes. Imagine a racist country like US telling Ghana we should be better about human rights.
I see. Maybe they're also working on it. Okay, so with this one, we're also going to do the same. We'll look at the inputs. We'll look at tools and techniques. And also outputs. We can make a quick list, right? Some of the things we're going to indicate here, we've discussed them already in our previous videos. And one, you need the project management plan. Are you seeing that the project management plan is running across?
Yes.
Yes.
It tells you that it's a key document. But which of the what aspect of the management plan do you need? They are specific here. You need the risk management plan. Remember, the first thing you did, the first step was plan risk management, and the output was risk management plan. As long as in the first step your risk management plan was ready, you can use that as an input here. In the plan risk management, it was an output. So that output can become an input for performing risk, qualitative risk analysis, right? Two, you need project documents. But what project documents do you need? You need the risk register, obviously. You also need, I think this stakeholder, it's so important.
Stakeholder register.
Register, you know, the stakeholder register. And you also need the assumption log. And three, you need, remember the enterprise, environmental factors, and the organizational process assets. You need them. So basically, they're just four, right? And with the EAF, remember the studies, industry studies, academic, published materials, and what have you. And the organizational process assets, obviously can influence qualitative risk analysis. For instance, you may need information from similar projects conducted in the past. So what tools we need? Expert judgment is always there. Expert judgment. And there was no data gathering for step one, which was plan risk management, but we had data gathering for identify risk. It's also appearing here, data gathering and data analysis. But the techniques you need for qualitative risk analysis may be different from risk identification, right? So let's see some of them. Under the data analysis, you probably need the risk, probability, and impact assessment. So what does this tell us? Remember, we mentioned in a previous video that there is when preparing your register, let's go back. We mentioned probability and impact. Is it here? Methodology. Okay, this for previous. Technical. Okay, these are the discussion. Okay, so you see, probability and impact matrix. And which other one? Okay, so we need management of our channels. Okay, so probability and impact matrix. So is this qualitative or quantitative? So from what we indicated here, it's partly what? Qualitative. There's another one we're going to see other than the probability and impact matrix. So that's one. There's also the risk data. Quality assessment. How to assess the quality of the risk data you've gathered. And also assessment of other risk parameters. You need that. This spelling is not correct. Assessment of other risk parameters. Right, so those are basically the data analysis techniques you need for qualitative risk analysis. Right, but apart from this, at this stage, there are certain key terms you should be familiar with, right? There are certain key terms you're expected to be familiar with, and they're very important. There is propinquity. Propinquity. Strategic impact. Connectivity. All of these will help you in your qualitative risk analysis. Detectability. Controllability. We wouldn't discuss them anyway. Manageability. Dormancy. proximity, and urgency. Yeah, so these are some of the terms you would need in your description or qualitative analysis of risk. You need to use it. If you're to write a report based on qualitative risk analysis, there's a need to release the report, right? Another skill that we need, other than expert judgment, data gathering, data analysis, is, I want to use yellow, interpersonal. Remember, we had interpersonal, where in our previous step, interpersonal and team skills. Then you also need that ability to be able to categorize risk. So there's a risk categorization. Remember, you categorize according to whether it's a commercial risk. So you'll be able to, you should have that ability to tell this risk is a technical risk, this risk is commercial risk, this is external, and what have you. This is to help you assign the risk to the proper risk owners, right? So risk categorization, commercial, external. And sometimes I repeat these things because for sake of emphasis, technical and managerial. Right.
Individual.
Okay. Well, individual can either fall under commercial, external, technical. Those ones are levels. Okay. So you also be able to, apart from categorization, you should have that ability to present data. So data presentation is just like your thesis. In fact, for those of you who are going to use qualitative, who are going to do qualitative approach, use qualitative approach or quantitative approach, I think there's also the need to be able to look at these tools and techniques because we want to also apply them in carrying out your research. So there's a data presentation. With respect to risk, its probability, you should be able to present probability and impact. Matrix. Also, the hierarchical charts where you rank the risk according to severity, impact, and what have you. So rank them based on certain factors. Yes, please.
I think you should use the red ink or the move ink when you come to the sub ones, please.
Okay. So here I should have used red to differentiate, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, please.
Okay. I thought as much. Okay, is that all? No. Let's add meetings. Okay. So here we've added meetings. Right. So lastly, let's look at the output for, so it means today we've looked at two, basically. The other one will be quantitative. But before then, let's shift to something else as we've agreed. So what do you have to show that you've actually performed qualitative risk? What do you have to show that you've actually performed qualitative risk analysis? One is project document updates. Similar to the previous step. But what projects are you updating? In the previous one, we saw issue log. We saw, assumption log, issue log, and lessons learned. Let's see this one for step 3, right? There is also assumption. Okay, let me change the pen. There is also assumption. Log. There is the issue log. You update your risk register. And last but not least, your risk report. What this means is that there's a previous risk report for which you made reference to. After performing qualitative risk analysis, there's the need to update that report to a current report. That's what this means, right? That's good. We can end here, Chris. We can move on to step 4, which is perform qualitative risk analysis. So we're left with now 3. Is it 3 or 4? We're left with 4. Perform qualitative risk analysis, right? Before we move on to the responses. Right. So I want to make a request. So the request is, I think I sent a message. I'm sure you know the requests.
Moon
died, please. Maeshi, man is hot. In fact, I just wish as I'm talking with you now, before we go to sleep, we should just see something. Let something happen.
Awesome.
Yes, please.
Please, the output you've just written.
Yeah.
Is it under the
step 3? Perform qualitative risk analysis.
Oh, okay.
So all of this would an update. When you update the risk report, the assumption log is I expected that by the end of this, you should be able to update this document. You get it? Yeah, these documents. Is that right? Good. Okay, so please send. In fact, I'll not sleep early. I'll wait. I'll wait for the message. I'll wait for the prompts.
The Momo alert.
Yeah, correct. I didn't want to add the Momo, but you added it. Please, I'm waiting. Thank you. Good night. I'll share the video with you.